What is it about movies that can never capture the essence of a book? Is it that text on page is somehow more expressive than moving pictures? Are there necessary limits to what a medium of art can convey, given the differences of text, audio, visuals, and so on? This is a video about art mediums and the necessary limits of art mediums, if there are any. This is going to be quite technical. We're going to get deep into ideas about epistemology, computation, and of course, tie it all to the nature of beauty. I say it's going to be technical, but it's also going to be quite casual. I am just sitting here drinking tea, and I'm just thinking about something that I love to think about, which is art and the nature of art and the nature of beauty. So I'm going to be reading a little bit of a script here, and I'm going to be just sharing my thoughts as I have them. So if you're here for the ride, welcome. My name is Zachary Mizell. I love aesthetics, and I would love to hear what you think about the subject. I want to start with looking at a concept from computation called computational universality, and I think this is going to be very important for what we're looking at today. Computational universality means that all information is substrate independent. This is because there is a substrate called the Turing machine, which can simulate all possible information. And that means that the information need not be in any particular medium. It can be on a Turing machine. So like if I'm doing 1 + 1 = 2, I can do it in my mind. I could do it with parts of my T-set, but I can also do it on a computer. Turing machine just means a computer. And the motion of anything in the world can be done on a computer, and all information can be put into a computer. It can be abstracted away from whatever particular medium it's in and put into a computer. But really, there are lots of information mediums that are just as capable as a computer of storing all possible information. And anything as simple as text or visuals like pixels on the screen and things like that, they are all capable of abstracting and holding all information. So this substrate independence means that any information that can be conveyed in any medium of art can be conveyed in any other medium of art. And this is because anything that could be conveyed in art must be information, and that information must be substrate independent. And yet still, for some reason, adaptations seem to lack something when they are translated from a book, for example, into a movie. So why is it that these things lose their impact or lose the something? The reason why is due to a lack of efficiency with certain mediums. So I just want to state upfront and very cleanly the claims that I'm going to be making in this video. Okay, the first one is, in principle, any sufficiently expressive channel can encode any finite information. Okay, I said mediums earlier, but I'm going to break it down into smaller chunks called channels. I'll get into detail about that. But this really means that any movie or any image or any song or anything, even a meal, even this tea that I'm drinking here, can be conveyed in other mediums, in any other medium, in, as I say, any other channel. So a meal can be conveyed visually, and when it is conveyed visually, it will convey the exact same information, meaning that it embodies the exact same beauty. Okay, that's one claim that I'll be making. And the second thing that I'll be claiming is that in practice, many of these mediums and channels of expression, these are all different in efficiency. Different in efficiency of encoding information and decoding information for a regular human being. So this means that something like interpretive dance will be much less efficient at conveying the same beauty that is embodied and encoded into a Michelin star meal, right? It is difficult to convey tastes and flavors in dance. But in principle, I think it is possible. Okay, so both of those things I take as true, and that's going to be our starting point. All right, but I want to go into a lot of detail about just how weird this claim is that I'm making, because it is quite strange. So we want to look first into this idea that any sufficiently expressive channel will be able to express any information in such a way that any sufficiently expressive channel of information can convey all beauty that is possible to be conveyed at all. Okay, so fundamentally, beauty. At the very least, beauty must be some sort of information that is encoded into the mind of the person who is experiencing the beauty, the work of art. I see beauty as being initially encoded in the work of art And that work of art causes a transformation in the environment, being the mind of the person viewing the work of art, and it replicates itself. The beauty replicates itself from the work of art into the mind. And since that beauty is information, which is replicating, that information can be represented in several forms. In several forms, I just mean like a certain medium, a certain format. Again, 1 + 1 = 2. I can show it with my fingers. 1 + 1 = 2. I can show it with notation on text. I can just say it aloud as you hear me say it. It's the same information, but I'm conveying it in different mediums. That's what I mean there, that you can convey it in different forms. All information can be conveyed in many different forms. So a work of art is going to be a collection of a lot of information, much of which is going to be able to replicate into your mind, and it's going to be taking different types of forms, and they are taking necessary forms, and they are taking certain forms because of the restrictions of the medium that they are in. And so let's say a work of art, it must be in some medium, a work of art must be. You can't just have a work of art that is outside of any type of medium or outside of any um, sensory channel of expression. But if it is in any particular medium, it's going to be restricted to some channels of expression. Okay, so let me just kind of give more details about what I mean. In the broadest and simplest sense, I just mean like a movie is going to be two channels. It's going to be visual and audio. Okay, you get what I mean there? And if you have a book, it's going to be the channel is going to be visual texts on pages. Okay, so I keep saying channels of information. What are the channels of information for art? What are they specifically in detail? Okay, so I'll just start with the five senses. This is kind of the easiest way of putting it. You've got sight, you've got hearing, you've got smell, you've got taste, you've got touch. Okay, I think that's an incomplete list, and it's incomplete in two ways, but it's a useful starting point. It's incomplete because really each of those is a category of information. Like sight is not just one thing. Sight is contrast, sight contrast, and it's also color, for example. There are many other things, spatial things, spatial relationships, and so on. And those are all each individual channels. But it's useful just to categorize them all together as one thing. Sight is one category. It's also incomplete in another way because there are many different senses. There are other sense categories. Ambient humidity. I don't know where that fits in this list of five senses, but ambient humidity is another sense. And so, you have that type of thing. You have the sense of time. That's another thing that is a sense and can be used as a channel of information. But again, it doesn't fit cleanly into those five, the typical five senses that we usually identify. So in any case, that list of five things is incomplete in two ways. We also have interactivity, the ability to interact with a work of art as being another type of channel. But again, we don't need so much detail to get the broad understanding of what the different channels of expression are with a work of art. But things like time and interactivity, there are almost additional axes because they change the type of information and the type of structures that a work of art can carry if the work of art includes duration of some sort or changes over time, or if the work of art includes some sort of interactivity with the audience. It changes what you can convey. So my focus here, as you can tell, is more about the audience experience and the structure of the information. I'm not thinking about mediums in the typical way that artists might think about mediums, right? I'm not thinking about the materials. I'm not going to be characterizing oil painting from charcoal drawings. Both of those in my mind are both visual. I guess charcoal in this sense will be not including usually color. So it is a slightly different type, but oil painting, charcoal drawings, and photography, they're all materially different, and they might be considered normally as different mediums of art. But to me, they're all visual channels, right? In this framework that I'm talking about, they're all the same thing. They're all just visual. The materials don't really matter unless the materials are specifically bearing meaning in some way, which could be possible. There could be some reason why you want to have your work of art be charcoal or oil painting versus a photography. And that could be relevant to the work of art, but that's not what we're looking at in this particular case here. We're just looking at the channel. The channel is a visual channel, and all of those are the same. Okay, this visual category can be untangled into more narrow channels, and I'm going to only go through this with visuals. I'm going to leave you to infer all of the other things in terms of audio and and feeling, somatic feeling like touch and taste and so on. I guess I will break down taste, but anyway, I'm not going to break them all down super precisely. I'm just going to go a little bit into visuals and show how this can be deconstructed a little bit. Visuals can be distinguished by colors and intensity, as I've mentioned before with colors. An image could be limited to a single hue or to grayscale, and making brightness the only channel of visual information as opposed to brightness and color. Or an image could be limited in brightness, and all the hues are the only distinctions that carry information. So everything is equally bright, equal intensity across every color, but only hues change. Even further, you might have spatial locations of visual elements that are implied in the visual category, right? You have a pixel in one location and it's in relation to another pixel in a different location. I'm only saying pixel because I'm thinking of screens. But you can have visual information that is spatially related to each other. You could imagine a work of art where spatial relations are not relevant. And so there is no spatial relationship. Everything is just kind of on top of each other or unordered in some way, something like that. So generally, spatial location is another aspect of the visual category. Of course, you also have stereoscopic vision, like seeing in depth perception, essentially, that type of thing. Oddly enough, I think that movement is a separate channel that is slightly different than having motion pictures. I don't really know how to put this, but if you ever played the game Guitar Hero, for example, you play it and it has like a scrolling visual. You play Guitar Hero for long enough, and then you look at like a random wall, it will look like the wall is moving, even though there is no motion. And that shows that the motion aspect of our visuals is separate from the other things. I don't know if I explained that well enough, but it just shows that you don't need things to actually move to have the perception of motion, which means that the perception of motion is separate from things actually moving. Okay, but anyway, all of these distinctions, they do matter, and some of it will come up at some point, but we don't need to overly atomize it all too early right now. We don't want to lose focus in getting into all the distinctions. For most of the time, I'm just going to say something like a visual category or the auditory category and so on. So now we have an understanding of what the different channels are. We can categorize information in the way that information interacts with those channels. So in one sense, let's say you have information that is solely in one channel, and then you might have another bit of information that spans across multiple different channels. It spans across the visuals and the auditory, and the information needs to be across both, and so on. So let's try to build out these categories and make a little bit of that more clear. So the first category is going to be single channel information. This is information that's conveyed solely through a single channel, of course. At the limit, this makes communication quite difficult. So just imagine like the view of blueness without any reference to duration or intensity or anything else. It's just the hue of blue. It has nothing to do with color. It has nothing to do with location or brightness or anything like that. And there's no form. Okay, so very little information can be conveyed if you really tightly restrict to a single channel. Okay, but remember, we don't need to overly atomize, so you wouldn't need to do that. There's little information that can be encoded here in this sort of only blue type of thing with no reference to anything else. And the reason why is because there's no possibility, there are no other possibilities. It's only blueness. Now let's say you don't go so far into this sort of crazy limit, and you add just a little bit of extra possibility here, where you have the possibility of this sort of dissociated view of blueness with no anything else, but you also have the possibility of no visual input. So you have blueness and nothingness, and that's all. Here we've actually unlocked enough to convey all possible information. This channel is now a fully fledged information medium. It can convey anything, okay? And this is obviously maybe it's not that obvious, but this is how computers work. Of course, you have on and off, and everything is conveyed in terms of on and off. And that's all you need for a computer to convey all information. You could convey information in Morse code, I guess, and you can do other, things that computers can do. Anything that a computer could output, this sort of on-off could output also. So you already have a channel that is expressive enough to convey all possible information. But of course, the major obvious thing here is that it is very inefficient. Like if I just started to flash the screen with blueness and blackness, I don't think I would be able to convey a lot to you because most people don't know how to decode 0 1 0 1 0 1. It's not much. It's not very efficient for conveying information. Okay, but we will return to the efficiency a little bit later. Let's move on to the next type of category. Okay. Next category, single sense information. Okay, this is more broad in terms of still one category, still one sense, but there are many different parts of that sense. So in the image case, you have many possible colors, you have many different intensities, you have many different spatial relations, and so on. All of that is enough to convey quite a lot of information. And this is already this single sense category already encompasses some mediums that we are quite familiar with. So we're conveying, this is enough to describe paintings and photography and maybe even silent movies in some cases. If we're allowing for, the addition of time, then that means silent movies can fit there and changes over time. If we're allowing for some sort of interactivity with perspective, then we have sculptures as a medium. Anyway, it's a visual medium, that also allows for customizable perspectives. That's what a sculpture is. You can walk around it. That's what I mean. Even dance, again, that's a visual medium. So all of these things open up now that we have a single category, the whole visual sense category as the information medium. So just because it's all of a single category, it doesn't mean that the work of art has to be simple, or rather, it doesn't mean that the information conveyed in the work of art that is restricted to this medium that is of a single sense, it doesn't mean that it has to be simple. You can already see how something of this nature is quite universal, and there's quite a lot of complexity that's possible with just paintings or just photography or so on. And really, all information can be conveyed through visuals alone. And in this one, is a lot more efficient than just blinky lights or whatever. And it's nice that visuals is kind of one that's quite familiar to us. But if we think about other sense categories and try to restrict works of art to only one of them, it gets a bit weird. Now, of course, I think if you do audio, it's not that strange. Obviously, music is restricted to only the auditory sense. But you get strange with other things, right? If you have a medium that's restricting taste to only taste, like sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, or savory sometimes, depending on your definition of those two words. Let's just say savory for now instead of umami. Okay, but anyway, if you only restrict a medium to those five senses, allowing for varying intensities and combinations and so on, but you do not have any smells, you do not have any textures, you don't have any interactivity, you can't chew, you can't swallow, that type of thing. There's no visuals. If you get that type of restriction to only taste, you're in kind of a very strange world of art that is quite unfamiliar to us, that almost nobody ever experiences. I'm just going to say nobody ever experiences. Okay. I don't know why I needed to hedge by saying almost there. Okay. It creates a very narrow and unusual space to work within. But conceptually, it makes sense conceptually. It's valid theoretically, let's say, as a possibility for a full-fledged work of art to be restricted to only tastes. Yet even in this case, if we're trying to restrict to taste, which gives us 5 channels of information. So taste is the sense category with the 5 channels of sweet, sour, you know what those are. Even here, you get something very simple, but then you get something new that emerges in real life, let's say. Because some combinations are experienced as a distinct gestalt. I'm going to use the word gestalt. It's just a fun word to use, and I hear a lot of in art discussions things that I mean. So gestalt, that just means that the combination is different than any particular part or the addition of the parts individually. The gestalt is something new. The combination is something new. So in the case of a regular human and the way that the human sensory system works, you get some weirdness and weird combinations that happen with tastes. So there are two types of weird combinations that I'm going to define them. One is cross-modal and the other one is multisensory. Okay, so cross-modal is when one channel augments another channel. It either suppresses it or it amplifies it. So in the taste sense, where we're restricting our work of art to tastes and noticing some of the emergent kind of weirdness that happens because of how human sensory systems are set up. In this restricted taste sense, if you have a slight amount of saltiness, this can amplify the perceived sweetness. So the saltiness amplifying sweetness is cross-modal because one channel affects another channel. Similar with bitterness, bitterness suppresses the perception of sweetness. So if you have something that's really sweet and you add some bitterness, the sweetness kind of dies out a little bit. You lose a bit of the perception of the sweetness. Multisensory is another thing, which means that when multiple things combine, they combine into something new. It's not augmenting of one or the other. It's a combination into something new. This is kind of rare for taste, but it does happen. There's a combination of salty, umami or savory, and bitterness, and they combine into a new perception of something different. It's not a perception of saltiness, savoriness, or bitterness. It's a perception of something that's more different. It's just different. Some people might just say it's really meaty or it has a different type of mouthfeel or something like that. I don't know, but it's different. It's different from any of those particular 5 tastes, but it's triggered by having those 3 sensory channels activated at the same time. As a side note here, I think that most of these cross-modal and multisensory effects are kind of arbitrary mistakes by nature in the construction of the human sensory system, but they're still very valid to use in an artistic context, and they kind of they add dimensionality to all the works of art that we have. There are also some physical limitations to how things work in the senses. And again, I'm just going to call those mistakes of nature. That's not really relevant to call them mistakes or whatever, but I'm just kind of pointing that out. So for taste, one thing, for example, the sensory system fatigues very quickly, and the tastes adapt. So like if you eat a spoonful of sugar, which would be crazy, don't do that. But it's going to be very like intense and hard to the sweetness is going to be extremely intense. But then if you immediately after that take another spoonful of sugar, it's going to be much less intense. It's because your taste buds fatigue quite quickly. That fatigue or adapt, you might call it either thing. But the level of intensity of the first time is going to be much higher than the second time. And I'm just flagging that to flag them as separate channels. They're almost separate channels. It's like a separate system of knowledge that creates the fatigue and the adaptation and the cross-modal effects and so on. All of that could be considered as separate from the tastes individually. So if you have your 5 tastes as your medium, you might have to additionally define the connections and limitations as a part of a different medium that's more robust and closer to what humans actually perceive. Okay, but now enough about taste. You can kind of see how detailed just one sensory category can get when you actually start getting into the weeds of things, and that's what I want to point out here. The next category is multiple sense information. When you have multiple senses all used together, and now you open up a lot of different possibilities, and things get kind of crazy here. Okay, so this is when information is spread between multiple senses. The information being conveyed in a work of art, let's say in a movie, is conveyed both through the visuals and through the audio. So some information in art is conveyed using both at the same time, right? And then, of course, the various distinctions can be made within them. So you might have a particular idea that's being conveyed using specific colors at specific intensities with a specific sound being played at the same time or just after or something of that nature. There may also be lots of synesthetic There may also be a few synesthesic effects, similar to the cross-modal. And this is where one sense triggers another. Again, it's similar to cross-modal, but it's distinct because it's not damping or amplifying a different sense, it's actually triggering the next sense. So a movie can be set up in a way to build a connection between the audios and visuals, such that a specific visual trigger makes an auditory effect happen. Like something visually is associated with something auditorily, such that when you see the visuals, you hear the audio, even though the audio is not being played in the movie. Right, the simplest version of this type of thing, I'm kind of jumping a bit here, but the simplest version of this is you like see something very fuzzy, you can imagine how it feels. So that's like a synesthetic effect. You see the fuzziness, you feel the physical sensation. So the visuals are inducing the physical sensation. The visual channel is triggering the physical channel. Even though your work of art might not have anything to do with physicality. If it's a movie, there is no physical aspect of that medium. It's just visual and auditory, but you can trigger the physical sensations with the visual sensations. Some of those synesthetic effects are very common. Some of them are accidents of nature. Some of them are kind of dependent on a person's biology and so on. And a lot of them are just based on cultural context. They're just like mental associations that people build up over time. You can build them up while in your culture, just like through your life, or you can build them up specifically within a particular work of art. An artist can deliberately create associations to create synesthetic effects. So those are all, many different possibilities. So if we go to this restricted taste space that we were in before, and we expand it to include auditory things and physical sensations, we can explore a multisensory effect that is very common. Again, multisensory is when all the senses come together to create a new, almost a virtual sensation that can't be deconstructed into other things. So crispiness is one that's a quite interesting and distinct sensation. It combines saltiness and the sound as in both audio, air conducted sound, and bone conducted sound. And there's the physical vibration of the crunchiness and the crispiness. And then there's ambient humidity that you can sense within your mouth and can sense it outwardly also. There are a lot of things that all come together. And they form this sensation of crispiness, which cannot be deconstructed. If you didn't have if you removed any one of those senses, it would not be crispy. It wouldn't like build up to be almost crispy. Like if you had something that was salty and ambient humidity was low and you had the physical vibrations, but you couldn't hear anything, you wouldn't get something that's almost crispy. You just get you just have those three different senses triggered at the same time without this sort of distinct multisensory effect of crispiness. But you can increase crispiness by augmenting one of those things, making something slightly more salty. Like if you have the combination of all together, the audio, the saltiness, the crunch of the physical sensation, and so on, you can increase the crispiness by increasing the saltiness or increasing the vibration of the mouth or increasing the sound. This is one that's a easy one to do because sound happens bone conducted. So that's from your jaw as you're biting onto something, and your jaw vibrates and you hear it. And then you have it air conducted sound, and that's coming through your ears. And so you could, if you're eating something crispy and you want to increase the perceived crispiness, you just open your mouth as you eat so that you actually hear from your mouth into your ear and you hear it. And that increases the crispiness. Anyway, that's a side note. It's a bit of a side note, but I just want to kind of take a moment to recognize and realize how rich the culinary arts are. I really like art, generally speaking, but I like the culinary arts also, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, so I want to talk about it a bit. The food is a quite incredibly rich type of experience. It really does engage most of the senses. I think taste, smell, audio, visual, taste, smell, audio, visual, the somatic feeling, and so on. It does a couple other things too. And it also induces quite a few cross-modal effects. It induces multisensory effects. There are some synesthetic effects. All of those things are active. Plus, there's interactivity and dynamics, so things happen over time. There's changes into the duration. You can interact with it. You can decide how much you want to chew. You can swallow in particular ways. All of those things are interactive, and that creates just very rich field of art and beauty, possible beauty to be conveyed. It's much more rich than pretty much any other artistic medium. So anyway, once you open up and you get these information that can be conveyed across multiple senses and have all these other triggered effects, multisensory and cross-modal and synesthetic and so on, all those things. Once you get that, the mediums are wide open. So then it's quite easy to understand that any information can be conveyed in this type of medium that's multisensory mediums. And really, once you get to this point, the way to define mediums are to define the restrictions and limitations. The restriction, you're restricting, you don't want to have any taste or physical or whatever, you're only doing visual and audio. That's going to be like a type of medium. So medium is more like a constrained set of possible transformations across sensory channels. So then you can have like some practical questions to ask here, like which channels are being used, what are the channel's limitations, which transformations are native and efficient, which audience interventions are allowed, and what properties could not survive transformation. That's going to be very important. Because I think the most relevant, I think the most important part of defining a medium is understanding what things it must do and what things it can uniquely do. So we're going to focus a little bit on this part about which properties do not survive translation. So as we said a moment ago about the richness of food and how it's much more rich than any other medium, there are lots of things that are happening in food that are difficult to convey in words. And why is that? It's because of the lack of efficiency with words sometimes, or the lack of efficiency with visuals if you wanted to convey your food experience into visuals. It's going to be a loss of efficiency. And the loss of efficiency is so strong, you can say that that information cannot be translated. Even though in principle, I think it can be translated, it's just in practice, the efficiency is so different that you may as well say it can't be. And so those properties do not survive translation. So we all know the phrase, the kind of cliche phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And why is that? Well, it's really because visuals are poorly translated into symbols. But why is that? Why are some visuals poorly translated into symbolic text? And what even is a translation, let's say? So translation is when all of the information embodied in one work via one medium is changed to be embodied in a similar work using a different medium. In the limit here, the original work and the translation are both the exact same work of art because they both convey the same information and they embody the exact same beauty, and they also cause the exact same transformations in the world, in the minds of the people who interact with it, but they are just in different mediums. Possible, again, in principle, and it must be so because the mediums are using channels of information which are all universal. And so you can convey any information in any of these channels. But in practice, of course, the difficulty arises with the efficiency. So would you rather see a picture or read 1,000 words? What if it was a picture that also included words in text form? What if it was a picture that also included words in text and spoken words? Which medium would convey information the best? I think it matters what information is actually being conveyed to properly answer this question. But in some cases, one medium necessarily totally subsumes another medium. When it's able to convey all of the information at least as efficiently as the other. So a visual medium that is limited to symbolic text, like a book, let's just say, is necessarily less efficient at conveying information than a visual medium that can use any visual content. So imagine you have a book that's only text, and you have another book that's text and pictures. And you can just keep all of the text and include extra pictures, or you can remove some parts of the text that are not necessary when you can replace it by a picture better. You can see how the addition of other possibilities outside of just text means that you already have everything that is possible to be conveyed via text because you have text, and you have the additional things that can be conveyed more efficiently with just visuals arbitrarily. And you can see here in the context of books being adapted to movies that a book is just text on the page, and a movie is a visual medium, includes visual medium, which could include text on the screen. And so necessarily, you might think, a book is always less efficient at conveying information than a movie. So it should always be better to adapt a book into a movie. But why do movie adaptations often fall flat compared to their original book? So let's explore two reasons why. There is this hierarchy of expressiveness, and books are low on the hierarchy compared to movies. Okay, a conventional book is treated as a static and linear visual text with restrained formatting. There's no color usually. And given this limitation, a book can be fully absorbed into a movie. So there are some conventions here that are kind of relevant, and we'll mention. Like, for example, a movie is usually a certain length, and a book, sometimes books are very long, Um, so there's some restrictions or some conventional limitations going on there, where a book could be arbitrarily long and a movie is usually limited to 2 hours or something like that. 3 hours. It's kind of pushing it. We could just say, instead of saying a movie, we could say a TV show and kind of just generalize to the visual and audio format of any sort. But then we also have other weird conventions. Maybe they're not so weird, but we have other conventions. Like it would be odd if a movie, instead of just conveying the information auditorily and visually, they stopped doing that and just put text on the screen. This is something that they did with Star Wars, of course. George Lucas did with the opening of Star Wars, having just text scroll on the screen that can be read. It's a bit of an odd thing to do. It's not very commonly done. It wasn't done, obviously, at the time, and it even still is not very commonly done. So it's kind of a convention that people don't often do that sort of thing. But if they did, then of course they could just put any part of a book that is difficult to convey efficiently in visuals and typical visuals and typical audios of a movie. You could just replace it with the text on the screen and have people read it. This movie, at this case, could convey any information that any book could convey, at least as efficiently, but the movie would just have to not be afraid of breaking some conventions, like showing text on screen or maybe just narrating some parts, anything to convey the information that is not so easily conveyed otherwise. This could also be done instead of to convey information accurately, it could be to hide information, because it's sometimes integral to how the information in books function. You might have a book that deliberately uses some type of some sentences to describe something that's deliberately vague in a way that you couldn't do with standard movies. And so you would have to be able to narrate certain parts or just put text on the screen to hide some information and be a little bit more vague. And so in this case, the reason why a lot of movies are not as efficient as the books at conveying the information that you want to convey is just because of convention. They don't choose to make the movie extremely long to match the length of the book, or they don't choose to hide some information by putting text on screen or narrating directly, or they're not comfortable switching between being able to convey the information very, very efficiently via text and so on. But another thing is that a book is a physical object. There are things like topography and spacing and pagination and page architecture and stuff like this, paper stock, the binding, the tactile progression, all of these can carry meaning in a book. They can carry meaning. Most books usually don't do that. They use a lot of this space unused. There's kind of the necessary aspect of the medium of a book is it is visual, it is text, but it's also the physical, you actually have to hold the book, and there's also the sound of flipping a page, and you could have that be incorporated into the actual thing that you're trying to convey within the book. But most people don't do that. It's usually unused. If these were exploited in any way to convey information, then the information that is conveyed in the work of art that is in that medium of a book, it would be much more difficult to convey efficiently in a movie. So, for example, there's a book I really like. It's called House of Leaves, and it uses some unique properties of books that are difficult to translate efficiently into any other medium. So, in the most simple language, there is a reason why it is a book. It is most efficiently conveyed as a book, and it cannot be efficiently conveyed in any other format. It cannot even be translated into an audiobook efficiently because there's so much that's conveyed in the physical book that is held that could not be converted into an audiobook. So, as a very simple example, a lot of the book is told with footnotes. And sometimes the footnotes are quite easy to read. It's like a normal footnote. It says, read footnote number 5, and you go down and you read footnote number 5. And that's it. But there are some parts of the book where the footnotes are deliberately difficult to read. So the footnotes are on different pages, and you kind of have to flip and look through the page to find the right footnote. And some footnotes reference other footnotes, so you have to kind of go back and forth between different footnotes. And sometimes that happens in the book, and it becomes narratively relevant because the narrative is about a person being lost in a maze. And the structure of the book is sort of setting you up to be in a maze looking through the footnotes. Now, again, that's something that can be conveyed in a book, but that would be very difficult to convey in a movie. Even if you were to show text on the screen or have narration, it would still be very difficult to have the footnotes because there's a level of interactivity with a book that it just doesn't exist with movies. Also, as a part of the book, there are portions where sometimes you need to flip the book around, like you need to read it, askew. And so, and again, that becomes relevant. It's like there's a reason why you want to have this sort of physical element of needing to flip the book around. And that's not something present in a movie. You don't have this sort of physical aspect of a movie. Um, perhaps you could have a movie that's on a screen, like that's meant to be displayed on the phone, and pausing it and tracking it is a part of the movie. That would be interesting, I guess. And then some parts you could have it that you need to flip the phone around. I guess there is some loose possibility to have some of those things, but they don't typically happen. So it's not something there. So in these cases, if you have a book like this, it's using the properties of books that are unique to books and difficult to translate to anything else. And that would be one reason why a movie would not be able to efficiently have the same information as a book, meaning that it will not be as beautiful as the book, meaning that the adaptation won't work as well as the book. However, it's just not common for books to do that type of thing. Most books do not use these unique properties of books, and they're always able to be directly translated to, let's say, an audiobook, and then they can be easily translated into a movie, which has text and the possibility of audio narration. So if a book uses these sort of unique properties of books, like the material of the literal pages or the physical, the physical orientation of the book and topography and so on, you can't really use straightforward audio translations, and you can't use straightforward movie adaptations. So anything that would be an adaptation has to be sort of creative new construction and not a lossless transfer into a new medium. So those are really the two reasons why books often fail to be translated into movies efficiently. Now, you also have some other practical concerns. Some people are just not good at let's say there are a lot of things that you can convey in movies that people just are not used to. People aren't trained in understanding cinematography or color theory and so on. There's a lot of richness that you could convey there. And obviously, if you have a book, your book is not going to have any cinematography. You could, but it's not going to really have any cinematography. Most books are not concerned with that. And so translating it to a movie, something gets kind of weird going on there. And if the audience is not really trained in terms of understanding cinematography, even if this stuff is going to be conveyed well, most audiences are not going to pick it up. So there's no reason to learn how to adapt things from a book into, it's just not going to be necessary because most people aren't going to pick it up. So that's just more of a practical concern, though. Presumably, in a world where audiences are, just say, expert audiences in all levels and understanding any particular medium, you will still have the problems that I mentioned before. There's a particular scene in Harry Potter, The Prisoner of Azkaban. I just want to take it as a case study. Okay. In this scene, the students are in some magic class and they're learning about a shape-shifting creature that takes the form of whatever the person fears the most. The students try this out and the thing shapeshifts into many different shapes, and they can conquer their fears, and so to speak. But one of the students has their fear be something that is quite extreme. And so the professor steps in order to stop it from happening. Uh, And what happens is that it turns into the thing that the professor fears the most, and it's revealed to everybody. In the book, the thing that is feared the most is described as a silvery white orb. And this is deliberately meant to be quite mysterious and a little bit vague. The students and the reader do not really understand what's going on. But in this case, it's in the middle of a little bit of other action, so it kind of goes over your head as a reader. But in the movie, they don't show some silvery white orb. What they show is a bright full moon that has cloud cover. And it turns out that the professor is indeed afraid of the full moon. And the reason why is because he's a werewolf. But in the book, they're hiding the fact that he's a werewolf and they're hiding what that means. But in the movie, they didn't have a way of efficiently conveying this information. So they just show a moon, and it kind of spoils a little bit of that mystery. It's a little bit too obvious. And so this is one clear example where the higher fidelity medium, the movie, makes the adaptation worse. There is a special feature of the book, the medium, that uniquely conveys the information in such a way that's deliberately vague and has this more mystery. There is a possibility to make a work of art in such a way that it does not use any of the unique properties of any medium. And I would call these kind of vagabonds. It's kind of a silly term I put for it. But they can be translated easily into many different mediums without any special accommodations. And they, let's say, exclusively deal with abstract properties of art or narrative or whatever it is. But most works of art, they do find themselves entangled with a particular medium, such that they are more efficiently expressed with a specific medium and not others. Hey, you're this far into Zachary Marzell aesthetics video. I really appreciate you. I'm glad you're watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, now thinking about this hierarchy of mediums that are possible for works of art to be part of, you kind of get this idea of, is it possible to have a best medium? Is there a medium that is the best for all works of art universally? And I think that it is possible, and that medium is just virtual reality. Okay, but here I want to talk about what is possible in principle. I don't want to talk about practical limitations that we have today, things that are only possible with our current technology. So I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about the principle of things. So we don't need to go into hardware limits or latency or whatever specific mechanisms we need to connect people into a virtual reality machine. All that we're just going to get away with. I'm just going to define virtual reality as a medium with arbitrary control over all possible channels of information. So in virtual reality, the artist can create any sensory experience required for the work of art. They can curate what even seems like the wider environment also. But you can simulate a person in a room for them to be able to move around and interact with a book in that room for them to read. And in that sense, the book could be similar to any other book, but they've also simulated the world around them. And the environment could be coordinated in such a way to make the book um, more pleasant to read or easier to read, or maybe there could be some coordination between what is being read in the book and how the wider environment is showing up. You could create new artistic conflicts or resolve forms of artistic conflicts that are not even possible to happen with a regular book. Let's say the ambient temperature could change in coordination with the things that are being read, or perhaps you could have distractions, literal distractions that you read a part of the book and then you start hearing sounds outside. That could be a part of the narrative. Something silly like that, or maybe you read a certain part and then it triggers a sort of visual experience. Anything could happen. Anything could happen. So even though in any single channel of information you can convey any information, with virtual reality, all artistic information can be conveyed at extremely high efficiency. And we will be able to discover new types of artistic problems and new things that could conflict and new ways to resolve those conflicts artistically. These kind of new forms of art. And you, you wouldn't consider them to be new mediums, but there's something similar to like a virtual medium that could be created that's new. In this case, efficiency will not be automatically really high. You still take a lot of trial and error and trying new different things in order to find the best way of conveying new ideas. And most of the works that we have are going to be very different. The relationship to the works are going to be quite different when they are in virtual reality versus when they are in our sort of natural mediums. Because in the case of a natural medium, there are things that are necessary for them, and there are things that are unique to them. Whereas in virtual reality, there's not going to be anything that's necessary. And perhaps most works of art are going to be quite unique. But in the case of virtual reality, we only need to think in terms of the efficiency of conveying information through any channel or any combination of channels. We might want to conform some works into well-known collections of information channels, making them something like virtual mediums. But there's no necessary reason to do that. It'll just be a cultural happenstance. Our cultural history is the reason why we would restrict our channels to those sort of virtual mediums. So again, this is a big change in how we think about art and how we engage with art. From the early days of Shakespeare, writing works of art to be efficiently fitting into the medium, that was very important. Okay, Shakespeare wrote narratives that fit into the poetic medium that he was writing, and also into the what do you call it, the Victorian. There's a version of the stage play, like the type of stage that he used. The works of art that he wrote were adaptively fit to that specific medium of that type of stage. And works of art have been created in such a way to fit into a particular medium and to also display new things about a medium, like revealing new aspects of mediums by doing this. That's kind of the nature of natural mediums and how artists and audiences interact with those natural mediums. There's like a almost equal understanding between the audience and the artist of what the medium is going to be doing and what the possibilities are with that medium. And even when you sort of show new aspects of the medium, the artist has a little bit more understanding and they can show new aspects. The audience can just pick up on it immediately. There's like a very little gap between the understanding of what the audience and the artist have with understanding what the medium is. Right? Both have a pretty clear understanding of what the medium can do. Both have a pretty clear understanding of what alternatives can do. All of that is like, it's pretty open. It's common knowledge between the audience and the artist. And it's easy to notice the efficiency of storytelling in that case. But when we have a universal medium like virtual reality, there's no shared understanding about what channel constraints are going to be there, or like what a particular work of art is, right? Like if you start to experience a work of art in virtual reality, there's no necessary reason for it to be restricted to only the audio and only the visuals. where there's just kind of this kind of openness going on there. And so there's no common knowledge shared between the audience and the artist, unless, of course, the artist just decides to tell you what the medium is going to be and what the restrictions of that medium is going to be. But again, why would you even trust them? Why would you have to? You don't need to. So there's just like this kind of disconnect here that's going to happen. This sort of shared understanding of the constraints of a medium and how they fit with a particular work of art, all of that is going to be lost. An artist would need to do a lot to establish what the constraints are of a particular work of art in the virtual reality, and what mediums are going to be active, like not mediums, what channels of information are going to be active, and what the limits of those channels of information are, and show how efficient those channels of information are, and then show if you want to expand any of those channels of information and have that be relevant to the work of art at any point in time. All of that's going to have to be established for every work of art every time a work of art is presented. Conveying that in such a way that you can actually create interest when some of the channels expand in their capabilities, or when there's some sort of logical extensions or contradictions between things that are being conveyed. All those things have to be established fully upfront somehow. Anyway, that's just going to be something very interesting and different than how we convey art now and how we interact with art mediums. But the question stands, as we've been talking about the sort of relationship between hierarchies and different mediums, and books and movies and so on. Will a virtual reality generator be able to capture the essence of a book or a movie? I think yes. I think totally so. I think necessarily so. The virtual reality will be able to recreate any experience, also being able to arbitrarily expand any experience in such a way that everything can be expressed in the most efficient way. But what is lost with this? Perhaps there's some form of unity that's lost, some sort of cohesion form. I don't know, cohesion, I'm not sure how to put this, right? But without the necessary restrictions of natural mediums, and the channels being used at any portion of a work can be changed arbitrarily to efficiently convey information. And there's something that is lost there, because sometimes the conveying of information in a restricted way conveys information. There's a unity with how a work of art is entangled with a medium that gets lost with virtual reality. And of course, the shared knowledge, the common knowledge of what the restrictions are of a particular medium, that gets lost with virtual reality. And I imagine a lot of these things could be kind of jarring if you just jump into a virtual reality experience and you don't know what channels are going to be activated. That might be jarring. And I don't know, that's going to be something that perhaps you have to learn to not be jarred by. You might have to learn how to integrate that. Maybe there's a way to integrate that into the meaning of the work, or into the structure of the work and the information that's being conveyed. I'm not sure. So there is something that's lost, but I do think it still is going to be possible to convey all the information that you need accurately and efficiently in virtual reality, better than in a movie or better than in a book. The virtual reality will be able to recreate any experience while also being able to arbitrarily expand that experience, such that everything that could be expressed in the most efficient way to express it. Another curiosity with virtual reality is I do expect that most people process things differently. Some person processes visuals more efficiently than they process audio. Another person processes audio. There's going to be differential efficiency in processing from the audience perspective. And you could, of course, just have a work of art that is conforming to how the particular individual audience member processes information. And so it changes in order to convey things efficiently per audience. Now, in this sense, they're not changing the story at all. They're not changing the music or whatever. It's not changing things to match what the person prefers. It's changing in order to match the efficiency of their processing. Now, I have mixed feelings about this one. Of course, I do think it's possible to happen, it would be quite difficult, I'm sure, to figure out all those things. But I've got mixed feelings with it. Again, there's just something lost with the disconnect with whatever work of art being conveyed and entangled with a particular medium. And I don't really like that. I don't know why, I just don't like it. As I said, from the time of Shakespeare, Shakespeare was writing works of art that fit into the medium of stage plays, the specific format of stage plays at the time. And we have movies now that are made in such a way that they fit well with the medium of movies. Like the cinematography is made in such a way, and you can't convey that in different ways. And now, if you were to arbitrarily change that so that the information can be better, more efficiently recognized by a particular audience member, I don't know. I feel squeamish about it. But anyway, that's just me today, feeling squeamish about it before we even understand and experience to the full extent those possibilities. And I would expect that if that's not really done very well, if the changes of efficiency are not done well, it's going to be a greater splintering of our shared beauty, like the knowledge that we can encode in works of art and the knowledge that is going to be conveyed into the audience members' minds. All of that's going to be splintered a little bit more because every work of art is going to be kind of, could be tailored to the particular audience member. I don't know how I feel about it. Ambivalent, multi-dimensional feelings. I don't like the possibility that and there's only a superficial way, perhaps, but there seems to be a way that the beautiful patterns that are embodied in the work of art they could be becoming more personalized and subjective, as opposed to being wide-reaching and everyone can experience similar things and independently improve those things and find new possibilities and so on. That there's something weird about it that I just haven't quite figured out how to think about and why. Well, I know why I feel weird about it, but yeah, something seems to contradict something in my mind that I haven't quite figured out. All right, so that's the hierarchy here set up with virtual reality at the very top of the hierarchy. And once you get there, something is kind of lost somehow. Some of the restrictions are kind of lost. Something's kind of getting weird. But still, the hierarchy is quite well laid out, and we can see that books are kind of low, movies are a little bit higher, and so on. So we can cleanly answer, why do books not convert well to film? And a part of it is because we don't have this clear hierarchy that I've laid out a part of the hierarchy, but we don't have a full taxonomy of every medium with highlighting all of the necessary components that each of the mediums have and all of the unique features that the mediums have. We don't have this idea of how to exploit some of those unique features and how to convert things accurately and so on. We are kind of stuck with some conventions that make it difficult to convert certain things. We're kind of slow to remove our conventions with some aspects of mediums. And even if we get to the point where we have every possible channel available to us to convey information, and each of those channels being universal, we would still have some difficulty in converting works of art, adapting them into this new universal medium. Because some things are lost when the common knowledge of the natural mediums are disrupted.